How are you feeling?
A little better, seeing you.
I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere.
The dust in Lagos didn't just settle. It clung to the skin like a second, grimy layer of desperation. Ihuoma stood in the center of her cramped apartment in Yaba, the hum of a failing generator vibrating through the floorboards. On the scarred wooden table sat a stack of final notices, their red ink bleeding into the humid air. She had 3 days to find 5 million naira, or the landlord's security would ensure her family ended up on the street, or worse. A sudden sharp knock didn't just rattle the door, it commanded it to open. Ihuoma gripped a kitchen knife, her knuckles white against her dark skin. But when the door swung inward, it wasn't the local thugs. 2 men stood there, looking like polished obsidian statues in the sweltering heat. They wore black suits that cost more than the entire apartment block, their expressions devoid of the usual predatory chaos of the streets. They were clinical, lethal. "Ihuoma Kalu?" the shorter one asked. His accent was thick, East Asian, but his English was perfect. "Who's asking?" she replied, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. The man stepped inside, eyes scanning the room with a dismissive flick. "We represent a man who values rare things. And you, Miss Kalu, are the rarest thing in the world right now." He didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he placed a tablet on the table. On the screen was a medical file, her blood type, her HLA markers, her recent screening from the clinic where she'd tried to sell blood for grocery money. Beside it was a photo of a young girl, Han So-ra, looking pale and ghostly in a hospital bed. "Our employer's daughter is dying," the man continued, his shadow stretching across her unpaid bills. "You are the only compatible match we have found in 3 continents. You have something we need. We have something you need." He slid a briefcase onto the table. When he flipped the latches, the scent of crisp, uncirculated US dollars filled the room. It was enough to clear her debt 10 times over. It was enough to buy a new life. "Who is your employer?" Ihuoma asked, her gaze shifting from the money to the man's cold, dark eyes. "Han Jae-min, and he doesn't like to wait." Ihuoma looked at the knife in her hand, then at the money, and finally at the photo of the dying girl. She knew this wasn't a charity mission. This was a transaction. By the time she dropped the knife, she felt the invisible collar of the Han family tightening around her throat. "Pack a bag," the man said, already turning toward the door. "The jet leaves in an hour. Your life as you know it just ended." The first thing Ihuoma noticed was the silence. It wasn't the heavy, humid silence of a Lagos night, punctuated by distant sirens or the hum of a generator. This was a clinical, expensive silence, the kind that only money can buy. Then came the pain. It was a sharp, localized fire in her side that flared with every shallow breath. She tried to shift, but her limbs felt like lead, weighed down by the lingering fog of anesthesia. Her eyes flickered open to a ceiling of soft, recessed lights and walls the color of moonlight. "Don't move," a voice commanded. It was deep, resonant, and carried the chill of a winter morning. Ihuoma turned her head slowly. Standing by the floor-to-ceiling window was a man who seemed to swallow the light in the room. He was tall, his silhouette framed by the glowing neon veins of Seoul's skyline. Even in the dimness, his presence was suffocating. He wore a charcoal suit that looked like armor, his hands clasped behind his back as he studied her with the detached intensity of a collector examining a new acquisition. "Where am I?" she rasped, her throat feeling as though it were filled with glass. "A private wing of the Asan Medical Center," he said, stepping into the light. This was Han Jae-min. His features were dangerously sharp, a high bridge of the nose, a jawline that could cut, and eyes so dark they looked like ink. The surgery was successful. My daughter is stable. Ihuoma let out a shaky breath, her hand instinctively drifting toward the bandages on her abdomen. And the money? My family? Jae-min walked toward the foot of her bed. He didn't offer a smile or a comforting word. Instead, he leaned slightly forward, his gaze pinning her to the pillows. The debts in Lagos have been erased. Your family is safe. You have fulfilled your end of the bargain, Ihuoma Kalu. Then let me go home, she whispered, her Nigerian accent thick with exhaustion and defiance. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips, but it held no warmth. It was the look of a man who had never lost a negotiation in his life. You have given my daughter a part of yourself. In my world, that creates a bond that money cannot fully sever. You are no longer a stranger. You are a vital organ of this family. He reached out, his fingers hovering just inches from her face before he pulled back. A flicker of something, curiosity, perhaps, crossing his icy expression. You will stay here until you are healed, and then we will discuss what else you owe me for the privilege of surviving my world. He turned to leave, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. Ihuoma stared at the ceiling, the realization sinking in. She hadn't just sold a kidney. She had sold her freedom to a man who didn't believe in letting go. Recovery was not a request. It was an order. For the next 2 weeks, the hospital wing became a gilded treadmill of physical therapy and silent observation. Ihuoma pushed through the searing pain in her abdomen with a grim, athletic determination that seemed to unsettle the nurses. She was a ghost in their hallways, until the day the doors to the VVIP suite were thrown open, and she was ushered into the presence of the girl who now carried a piece of her. Han Sora did not look like a dying girl anymore. She sat propped up against silk pillows, her hair a glossy black river against her white gown. Her eyes, sharp and unnervingly intelligent, tracked Ihuoma's every movement as she entered. "You're taller than the photos," Sora remarked, her voice a fragile chime. She spoke English with a posh, international school lilt. "And darker, like obsidian. It's beautiful." "I'm glad you're feeling better," Ihuoma replied cautiously, keeping her distance. She felt a strange, phantom ache in her side, a psychic tether to the girl in the bed. "Better?" Sora laughed, a small, dry sound. "I feel like I've been haunted. My father says I owe you my life. He's very literal about debts, you know. He doesn't think you should go back to Lagos. He thinks the world there is too small for someone who contains a part of a Han." The door behind them opened, and Jae-min stepped in. The air in the room instantly pressurized. He didn't look at his daughter first. His eyes went straight to Ihuoma, scanning her posture, the way she stood, defiant even in a hospital robe. "Sora needs a companion," Jae-min stated, his voice dropping into the room like a stone in a well. "Someone who isn't a sycophant. Someone who knows the value of a life because she risked hers to save it." "I'm not a governess," Ihuoma said, her voice low and dangerous. "And I'm certainly not a doll for your daughter to play with." Jae-min took a step closer, his presence a physical weight. The scent of sandalwood and expensive tobacco enveloped her. "You are more than that. You are the only person in this city who has no reason to fear me and every reason to protect her. From today, you stay in the penthouse. You eat with us. You move with her. You will be her shadow, her confidant, and if necessary, her shield." "And if I refuse?" Jae-min leaned in, his lips hovering near her ear, his voice a silk-wrapped threat. I have already paid for your past, Ihuoma. Don't make me own your future, too. Stay, and you live like a queen. Leave, and you are just a woman with one kidney and no protection against the people I kept from your door. Sora watched them, a knowing, manipulative smile playing on her lips. She saw the spark of friction between her father and the woman from Lagos, a fire that neither of them seemed ready to extinguish. The Han penthouse was a masterpiece of glass and steel that felt less like a home and more like a high-altitude observation deck. Ihuoma found she couldn't sleep. The silence of the city's upper atmosphere was too thin, lacking the rhythmic chaos of Lagos that had always lulled her to rest. Restless, she moved through the darkened corridors until she found the kitchen, a cavern of marble and professional-grade appliances that looked like they had never been used by a human hand. She was hovering over a sophisticated espresso machine, frowning at the digital display, when the scent of sandalwood preceded the man. It requires a finer grind for that roast. Jaemin's voice vibrated through the quiet. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His white silk shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were lean and corded with muscle. He looked less like a titan of industry and more like a predator at rest. He stepped into her personal space, his hand reaching past her to adjust the settings on the machine. He didn't move away once the task was done. "I didn't think you slept," Ihuoma said, her back pressed against the cold marble counter. "I thought you just sat in the dark and calculated interest rates on people's souls." Jaemin let out a short, dry breath, the closest she had heard him come to a laugh. He poured a shot of espresso into a small porcelain cup and handed it to her. "Usually I do, but tonight, I find myself thinking about why a woman who clearly hates me hasn't tried to run yet. You're strong, Ihuoma. You're fast. And my security has gaps if you know where to look." "Running only works if there's somewhere to go," she replied, her eyes meeting his. She didn't flinch. "You've made sure my world back home is a closed door. I'm just waiting to see what your next move is." Jaemin took a step closer, close enough that she could see the faint, jagged scar near his temple. He reached out, his thumb grazing the pulse point at her throat. It was a gesture of terrifying intimacy, one that made her heart betray her by leaping against his skin. He felt it. A slow, dark satisfaction spread across his features. "My next move is to keep you," he whispered. "Not because of the debt, not because of Sora, but because you are the only person who looks at me and doesn't see a monster or a king. You see a man, and that makes you dangerous." He took the cup from her trembling hand and set it aside. For a moment, the air between them was electric, thick with a forbidden gravity that threatened to pull them both under. Then he stepped back, the mask of the Mafia boss sliding back into place. "Finish your coffee, Ihuoma. We have a gala tomorrow. Try not to look like you're planning my murder while you're wearing the diamonds I bought you." The transition from the penthouse's quiet luxury to the industrial outskirts of Incheon was a violent jolt to the senses. Jaemin had instructed Ihuoma to accompany him under the guise of familiarizing herself with his schedule. But as the black sedan pulled into a rusted shipyard, she knew this wasn't about business logistics. The air here tasted of salt, old oil, and fear. Inside a cavernous warehouse, the shadows were long and jagged. A man was tied to a chair in the center of a single pool of light, his face a map of bruises. Jaemin didn't break his stride as he entered. He didn't even remove his overcoat. He simply stood before the captive, his presence turning the room several degrees colder. "I don't like waste," Jaemin said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "And you, Mr. Park, have wasted 3 shipments of my time." Ihuoma stood by the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen poverty in Lagos. She had seen the desperation of the streets. But this was different. This was the clinical application of power. Jae-min didn't look angry. He looked bored, which was infinitely more terrifying. When one of his men stepped forward with a heavy lead pipe, Ihuoma's instincts screamed. She took 2 steps into the light. "Wait." The men froze. Jae-min turned his head slowly, his dark eyes locking onto hers. The silence was so heavy it felt physical. "You were told to observe, Ihuoma, not to speak." "You told me I was here because I know the value of a life," she said, her voice trembling but her gaze held high. "If you do this, you're just proving that everything you told me about family and loyalty is just a pretty lie to cover up the fact that you're a butcher." The guards shifted uncomfortably, their hands twitching near their holsters. No one spoke to Han Jae-min like that. Jae-min walked toward her, his footsteps echoing like gunshots on the concrete. He stopped inches from her, his shadow swallowing her whole. He reached out, his hand gripping the back of her neck, not with violence, but with a terrifying, possessive firmness. "The world is a butcher shop, Ihuoma," he whispered, leaning down so his breath brushed her cheek. "I am simply the one holding the knife so Sora doesn't have to. You think you're above this? You're breathing because of the blood I've spilled to keep this city quiet." He looked back at his men and gave a curt, dismissive wave. "Get him out of my sight. Don't kill him, yet. I have a guest who lacks the stomach for reality." As he led her back to the car, his grip remained on her arm. Ihuoma looked at his hand, at the expensive silk and the clean skin, and realized that the man who had shared coffee with her at midnight was the same ghost who haunted the nightmares of the city. She wasn't just his daughter's savior. She was his captive in a war she didn't understand. The transformation was complete, but the woman in the mirror felt like a stranger. Ihuoma stood in a gown of deep emerald silk that clung to her curves like a second skin, the rich fabric a striking contrast against her dark, radiant complexion. Around her neck sat a collar of diamonds that felt less like jewelry and more like a high-priced leash. Sora stood behind her, adjusting a stray lock of Ihuoma's natural hair with a proprietary smile. "Tonight," the girl whispered, "everyone will wonder who you are. Let them wonder. It makes you dangerous." The gala was held in a ballroom that felt like a cathedral of glass, overlooking the glittering expanse of Seoul. As they entered, the ambient hum of conversation faltered. Ihuoma felt the weight of 1,000 gazes, some curious, others predatory. She wasn't just a guest, she was a declaration. By bringing her here, Jae-min was showing the underworld the woman who held his daughter's life in her hands.
Jae-min appeared at her side, a phantom in a tuxedo.
He didn't offer his arm. He simply stood close enough that the heat from his body radiated through her silk sleeves. "Keep your head up," he murmured, his eyes scanning the room with lethal efficiency. "Half the men in this room want to be me. The other half want to destroy me. Tonight, they will try to use you to find a weakness in both." "I'm not your weakness, Jae-min," Ihuoma replied, her voice low and steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her. "I'm the only person in this room who doesn't owe you anything." "That is exactly what makes you a target," he countered. As they moved through the crowd, the tension became a physical pressure. A rival boss, a man with a scarred lip and eyes like flint, stopped them, his gaze lingering uncomfortably long on the curve of Ihuoma's neck. "So, this is the miracle worker from Lagos," the man sneered, his English accented and oily. "A lot of effort for a single kidney, Han. I hope the investment pays off before the market crashes." Jae-min's hand found the small of Ihuoma's back. It was a protective gesture, but his grip was tight, his knuckles white. The air between the two men turned electric, a silent war of wills that threatened to shatter the fragile elegance of the evening. Ihuoma realized then that she wasn't just a shadow or a companion. She was the prize in a game of high-stakes territorialism. Every smile felt like a knife. Every toast felt like a threat. As the music swelled, Jae-min leaned in, his lips brushing her ear in a way that looked like a secret to the observers, but felt like a warning to her. "Don't leave my side. The vultures are hungry tonight." The adrenaline of the gala had left a metallic tang in the air, but as the armored car pulled into the penthouse garage, the silence returned, heavy and suffocating. Sora had retired early, exhausted by the weight of her own survival, leaving Ihuoma and Jae-min alone in the sprawling living area. The city lights flickered through the glass like distant, dying stars. Jae-min didn't head for his office. Instead, he stopped at a small, unassuming console table in the corner, far from the modern art and cold steel that defined the rest of the apartment. He poured 2 glasses of amber liquid, but didn't drink. His gaze was fixed on a small, framed photograph, the silver edges tarnished by time. "She used to hate these parties," he said, his voice stripped of its usual command. It sounded hollow, like an echo in a tomb. Ihuoma approached slowly, her emerald heels clicking softly on the marble. She looked at the photo. It was a woman who looked strikingly like Sora, but with a softness in her eyes that the daughter had lost to the hardness of her world. "Your wife?" "Min-hee," he whispered. "She was the only thing in my life that didn't have a price tag. When she got sick, I realized for the first time that all the power I'd bled for was useless. I could burn the city to the ground, but I couldn't buy her a single extra breath." He turned to Ihuoma, and for the first time, the ghost was gone. In his eyes was a raw, jagged grief that made him look human, and devastatingly fragile. When Sora began to fail, I felt the same rot starting in my own chest. I was ready to become a monster to save her. Then you arrived. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as his fingers traced the line of Ihuoma's jaw. "You didn't just give her a kidney. You gave me back the only part of Min-hee I had left. I don't know how to handle a debt that big, Ihuoma. My world is built on balances, but you are an infinite credit." Ihuoma felt her guard, the one she had built brick by brick in the slums of Lagos and reinforced in the cold halls of Seoul, begin to crumble. She saw the man behind the armor, a father drowning in the fear of loss, a husband still haunted by a ghost. She didn't pull away. Instead, she covered his hand with hers, her warm, dark skin a stark contrast against his pale, cold palm. "You don't have to buy my loyalty, Jae-min," she said softly. "You never did." The air between them shifted from the tension of a hunt to the gravity of a shared wound. In that moment, the boss and the donor vanished. There was only the heat of his skin, the scent of sandalwood, and the terrifying realization that she was no longer just his investment. She was becoming his heart. The piece of the penthouse didn't break. It shattered. A muffled percussion shook the floor, a breaching charge, followed immediately by the rhythmic thwip-thwip of suppressed gunfire. The floor-to-ceiling glass, once a window to the stars, became a shower of crystalline daggers. Jae-min's transformation was instantaneous. The grieving man vanished, replaced by a predator. He shoved Ihuoma toward the hallway. "Get to Sora, the safe room behind the library, go!" He drew a weapon from beneath his silk shirt, his eyes turning to cold flint as he moved toward the primary breach. Ihuoma didn't hesitate. Her years of sprinting through the crowded, unpredictable alleys of Yaba had given her a kinetic intelligence that no training could simulate. She vaulted over a fallen sofa, her emerald silk dress ripping up the thigh, and sprinted toward Sora's quarters. She found the girl huddled in the center of her room, paralyzed by the strobe lights of the security system. Outside the door, heavy boots thudded against the hardwood. They were close. "Sora, move!" Ihuoma commanded. The door kicked open. A man in tactical gear leveled a submachine gun, his eyes hidden behind a visor. Ihuoma didn't have a weapon, but she had momentum. She launched herself off the bed, using the mattress as a springboard. She hit the gunman mid-thigh, her athletic frame a blur of dark skin and green silk. The impact sent them both crashing into the hallway. The air left her lungs, but the adrenaline kept her moving. She twisted, using her legs to trap the man's arm, and slammed his head against the marble floor with a sickening thud. She didn't stop to breathe. She grabbed the fallen weapon, her hand steady despite the tremor in the building. "Ihuoma!" Sora screamed. Another shadow appeared at the end of the hall. Ihuoma didn't think, she reacted. She shoved Sora into the recessed alcove of the library and stood in front of her, the gun raised. Her side ached, the sight of the surgery screaming in protest, but she stood her ground like an ancient sentinel. "Stay behind me," Ihuoma hissed, her eyes narrowed. The attacker hesitated, seeing not a terrified companion, but a woman who looked like she was carved from iron. Before he could fire, a single shot rang out from the opposite direction. The man fell. Jae-min appeared through the smoke, his white shirt splattered with crimson, his gaze frantic until it landed on them. He saw the gun in Ihuoma's hand, the bodies on the floor, and the way she shielded his daughter. The debt he had spoken of earlier suddenly felt even heavier. She wasn't just a donor. She was the wall between his world and the end of his bloodline. The aftermath of the attack felt like the cooling of a furnace. The penthouse was a ruin of shattered glass and spent shell casings, but the true carnage was happening elsewhere. Jae-min had disappeared for 3 days, leaving a trail of broken syndicates and silenced rivals across the city. He wasn't just cleaning up a mess. He was burning the world to ensure it never touched Ihuoma again. When he finally returned, the sun was beginning to bleed over the Seoul horizon. He walked into the living area with a heavy, rhythmic gait. His suit was gone, replaced by a black tactical sweater, and his knuckles were bruised a deep, haunting violet. Ihuoma was waiting for him, sitting on the edge of a pristine white sofa that seemed out of place in the wreckage. He stopped a few feet away, the scent of gunpowder and rain clinging to him. He pulled a heavy, leather-bound folder from his pocket and tossed it onto the table. "It's done," he said, his voice sandpaper rough. "The men who targeted you are gone. Their families are exiled. Their names are erased." Ihuoma didn't look at the folder. She looked at him. "And the debt?" "Inside that folder is a Nigerian passport with a new name, a deed to a home in Victoria Island, $5 million in a clean offshore account." Jae-min's eyes flickered, a momentary break in his iron composure. "You are free, Ihuoma. The surgery, the protection of my daughter, the blood you spilled in that hallway, the debt is repaid, 10 times over." The silence that followed was deafening. This was the moment Ihuoma had prayed for since the 2 men in black suits first stepped into her apartment in Yaba. She was a free woman. She could go back to the heat, the music, and the family she had sacrificed everything to save. She stood up, her side still aching, and walked toward him. She stopped so close she could feel the frantic heat radiating from his body. "Why do you look like you've just lost everything then?" Jae-min didn't turn away. He reached out, his hand trembling as he cupped her face, his thumb tracing the curve of her lip. The coldness was gone, replaced by a desperate, suffocating longing. Because I realized that I didn't want a donor. I didn't even want a shadow. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. I want the only woman who ever made me feel like the man Min-hee loved. If you walk out that door, I will let you. But I will be half a man for the rest of my life. Is that another contract, Jaemin? She whispered, her heart thundering against her ribs. No, he rasped, his eyes searching hers for a sign to stay. It's a plea. The airport transfer was waiting downstairs, a black car idling in the rain, to take Ihwoma to the life she had once begged to reclaim. The leather-bound folder, her ticket back to the Lagos sun, sat heavy in her hands. She looked at the passport, then at the man standing by the window. Jaemin looked hollowed out, a king who had finally conquered his enemies, only to realize his throne was a tomb. Ihwoma walked to the table, and with a slow, deliberate motion, slid the folder back toward him. I'm not taking the money, she said. Jaemin turned, his eyes narrowing in confusion. Ihwoma, you've earned it. You've earned 10 lifetimes of peace. Why? Because if I take that money, I'm still just a transaction in your ledger, she said, her voice ringing with a new, sovereign clarity. I didn't survive a slum and a surgery to be anyone's investment. If I stay, it won't be as your debt holder, and it certainly won't be as your shadow. She stepped into his space, her presence commanding and grounded. I want a new contract, Jaemin. One written on my terms. A flicker of intrigue and hope reignited in his gaze. Tell me. I want a seat at the table, she said, her dark eyes flashing. You told me the world is a butcher shop. Well, I'm tired of being the meat. I stay as an equal. I manage the foundations. I oversee the legitimate assets. And I stay by Sora's side because she's my blood now, not because you pay me to be. And you, she reached up, gripping the lapel of his sweater, pulling him down until their breaths mingled. You will never lie to me about the blood on your hands again. You want a partner? Then you get all of me, the compassion and the fire. Jaemin's hands found her waist, his grip possessive but respectful, acknowledging the shift in power. He had spent his life owning people, but he realized now that the greatest luxury was being chosen by someone he couldn't buy. You're asking for more than a contract, Ihwoma, he whispered, his forehead pressing against hers. You're asking for my soul. I already have your daughter's life and your rival's fear, she countered with a sharp, witty smile. I might as well take the rest. Outside, the car for the airport pulled away, empty. In the heart of the penthouse, the boss and the donor were gone. In their place stood two architects of a new, dangerous empire. Jaemin leaned in, finally closing the distance between them with a kiss that tasted of rain, sandalwood, and a debt finally, beautifully settled. Ihwoma Kalu was no longer a victim of fate. She was the queen of the underworld.